today's session, Cannabis and Dementia. I hope you all can hear me and see me and also see my slide, right? As Jessica was mentioning, this is being recorded and sometime tomorrow probably you will get a copy of the recording along with a copy of my slides so that you can go over those slides again and share it with anyone you like. And also a link to an evaluation form, because we want all our presentations to be evaluated and we value your feedback. So when you do get that email with the recording and the link to the evaluation, it's a very short evaluation, but please do take the time, 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes it would take to complete it and send us your feedback, because that's the only way I can improve my presentations going forward. Okay, as Jess mentioned, I'm a learning specialist with the Alzheimer's Society of Calgary. My background is in family medicine and gerontology. I had my family medicine education and training in India and my gerontology education and training in Canada. Okay, so that's basically about me. I do not want to spend too much time talking about me. We have lots of ground to cover today, lots of exciting information. Now, you are all muted. My plan is to talk for the next 1 hour or so and then open it up for questions. So if you do have any questions, any questions come into your mind as you're watching this presentation, please do type them in the chat box and I will address them. To the best of my ability, I will try to answer them at the end of my presentation. So without any further delay, I would like to go ahead with the presentation. Yes, one moment, just trying to figure out how to move the, yeah, there you go.
What is going on, but I can't hear the damn thing.
This is the outline for today. So these are the topics that we will be trying to cover. So first I will describe or explain a little bit these terms that you will be hearing throughout this presentation. So cannabinoids, what are cannabinoids? What do you mean by medical marijuana and medical cannabinoids? So I'll be just introducing those terms. Then we will go discuss the safety and efficacy of cannabinoids in older adults and look at the evidence that is available at this point of time based on research evidence, of course, and then move on to cannabinoids in dementia. Is there a role for cannabis in treating dementia? If so, how would it act? And what is the evidence that is available to support the use of cannabinoids in dementia? And then we'll talk about some behavioral symptoms. These are very characteristic in any type of dementia. There are several mood and behavioral symptoms which are very challenging for caregivers. So we'll talk about whether cannabinoids can be a safer alternative to existing medications for managing these behavioral symptoms, mood and behavioral symptoms in Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia. We will look at what are the drug trials that are going on now and the new trials that are being planned. We'll look at the role of medical cannabinoids in treating other conditions in older adults and look at the evidence that's available. We'll discuss known harms and contraindications. So situations where it is not safe to use cannabinoids, and then some concluding messages and a brief introduction to the programs and services that are available to you through the Alzheimer's Society of Calgary. Okay, that's a plan for today. So first, let's look at what do we mean by cannabinoids? Cannabinoids are bioactive substances present in the cannabis plant. Okay. Now the cannabis plant is supposed to contain about 500 to 600 chemical substances. Of these, there are over 113, about 113 bioactive substances which are biologically active, and these are known as cannabinoids. And the most studied ones are ones we have already heard of before. That is the THC or tetrahydrocannabinol, the psychoactive product, that gives a sensation of high, and the cannabidiol or CBD, which is the less psychoactive or non-psychoactive component. When we talk about medical cannabinoids, we actually mean a combination of both. We include both medical marijuana as well as the manufactured or the synthetic cannabinoids. So both of them together, the medical marijuana, the natural product, the plant and the plant products, and the manufactured cannabinoids are together known as medical cannabinoids. Okay, so just clearing the confusion around some terms here. Moving on to characteristics of cannabinoid consumers. So this is based on a Canadian cannabis survey conducted last year in 2020. And according to this survey, 27% of Canadians used cannabis in the past year. And this includes about 44% of people in the 16 to 19 years age group, about 52% of people in the 22 to 24 years age group, and 24% of people who are 25 years and older. They reported using cannabis last year, and 31% of all males used cannabis versus 23% of females. I was curious about finding out whether because of COVID, there was any reported increase in the use of cannabis. And of course there is. So 22% overall reported increased use of cannabis due to COVID-19 related factors. So some of the reasons cited were stress related to COVID-19, then boredom related to that, anxiety, stress, anxiety, boredom, all that, and some people lost jobs, so depression related to that. So all those were the cited factors. And about 31% in the earlier age groups, about 16 to 19 years age group, and 31% in the age group of 20 to 24 years, and slightly lesser, fewer members in the age group of 25 years and older reported increased use last year due to COVID-19 related factors. Looking at the number of medical marijuana users in Canada, it has tripled right from 2014. It has tripled every year since up until 2017. We do not have the stats after that. Accurate stats are not available at this time, so I cannot comment on that. But we will look at the characteristics of Canadians who are using medical cannabinoids. Older adults account for 7% to 23% of medical cannabinoid users worldwide. So all over the world, it's about 27% to 23%. In Canada, 13.8%, so almost 14% of Canadians, so somewhere in between the 7 and 23%, we fall there. So 14% of Canadians, including about 15% of Albertans, have used cannabis in the last year for medical purposes. And the amount, and there is a proportion, there is a percentage that I've given here, and majority of the users, they used dried flower or leaf, that is the natural plant products, cannabis oil and edibles. They were mostly consumed. And the most common indications for using the cannabinoids for medical purposes were chronic pain, cancer-related pain, spasticity associated with multiple sclerosis or spinal cord injury. There are arthritis, some people use it for arthritis, sleep disorders, anxiety and depression. They were the common reasons for which it was used. And majority of older adults were using a mixture of cannabis strains. And the common routes of administration of using cannabis was via smoking, vaporization and oil. This is again based on the Canadian Cannabis Survey 2020. So what are the cannabinoids? We'll take a look at the cannabinoids, the active components present in cannabis, bioactive components in cannabis. So there are two major neuroactive components in cannabis, as I mentioned earlier. One is the psychoactive compound, which is called delta-9 THC, that is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. It's a psychoactive compound that stimulates the brain and gives that sensation of high. And there is a CBD cannabidiol, which is non-psychoactive. So that means it lacks that that stimulant effect or the effect, psychotropic effect of giving high. It doesn't do that. Of the several strains of cannabis available, cannabis sativa, this has got higher THC CBD ratio compared to cannabis indica. That's another. These are the two most common strains available. So naturally, the sativa has more of THC, higher content of THC. Therefore, it has got more psychoactive properties compared to indica. Indica strains are more kind of sedating, so they contain more of the CBD, so more of the sedating effect. The THC activates the endocannabinoid system. So it's a system in the body that through which it's mainly present in the brain, and through that the cannabis is exerting its effects. We'll have a look at that in the coming slides. And CBD has some anti-anxiety and behavioral effects, sedating. So anti-anxiety effect is there, also some positive effects on behavioral symptoms. So how do cannabinoids work? These cannabinoids, whether they are produced in the body, some are produced in the body and they are called endogenous cannabinoids. Some are produced in the body, and the external ones, either the plant, the herbal ones or the synthetic ones that we use, they all exert their effects through a system present in the body called endocannabinoid system. And this system is made up of endogenous cannabinoids, that is cannabinoids produced in the body. There are mainly two, anandamide and 2-AG. Those are the names of two common ones produced in the body in small amounts, and it modulates our response to pain and all that. Cannabinoid receptors, that's also a part of the endocannabinoid system, mainly CB1 and CB2 receptors. And there are some enzymes involved in the synthesis and breakdown of these endogenous cannabinoids. So it's acting through this system of endogenous cannabinoids. CB1 receptors are present throughout the brain, in several parts of the brain, mainly in the central nervous system, that's the brain. And CB2 receptors are present in some parts of the brain, like the cerebellum, the brainstem, but also present in peripheral tissues, like white blood cells, immune cells, etc. And they, as I mentioned, the cannabinoids, they bind to the CB1 and CB2 receptors. That's how they produce their effect, is by binding to these receptors, and they modulate the way the neurons communicate, the nerve cells communicate with each other, and thus they bring about the effects, whatever effects that they produce. That's how they bring about their effects. So this is the same thing shown in a more of a graphical form, diagrammatic form. So this is the endogenous cannabinoids produced in the brain. Some come from food, small amounts are present in some foods like flax seeds, omega-3 containing foods, omega-6 containing foods contain small amounts of these. And the one produced in the body, the anandamide, along with the herbal, the plant-derived cannabinoids, as well as the synthetic ones that are produced in the labs. They all work the same way by acting through the endocannabinoid system, as I mentioned earlier. So there are these CB1, CB2 receptors to which it binds, these compounds bind, and they produce their effects. And this system, endocannabinoid system, is involved in regulating a variety of physiological processes, a variety of processes in our body. For example, it regulates pain and pleasure, appetite, then immune system. It has a role in regulating the immune system, and also mood and memory. So this is a diagram that shows the various areas of the brain through which the cannabinoids act, where these receptors, CB1 and CB2 receptors, are located. So you can see that they are all over the brain. So for example, I'm not going through all of that. You have the column here, the table there that explains everything. But for example, through the CB1, but by attaching to the receptors in this region called amygdala, cannabinoids can cause panic, anxiety, panic. Okay, by attaching to the receptors in the hypothalamus, this part of the brain. Let me just pull out my pointer, laser pointer, then I can point. Yeah. By by attaching to the receptors in the hypothalamus, it can increase appetite. So there's a role in weight loss, managing weight loss, especially related to cancer and things like that. By attaching to this part called nucleus accumbens, it can actually cause sensation of pleasure, euphoria, that reward, sense of that feeling of euphoria. By attaching to the receptors in the basal ganglia, it slows reaction time. So that's why driving after using cannabis is not a good idea, because it can slow down your reaction time. This part of the brain, neocortex, by attaching to receptors here, it can actually affect our thinking, our perceptions, and a judgment that can be affected. And here in cerebellum, there are both CB1 and CB2 receptors, both are there, and it can affect our balance and coordination. So there's a risk of dizziness, and tendency to fall or fall risk is there. By attaching to the receptors in brainstem, it can actually, that's where its use comes in cancer treatment. So it can control nausea and vomiting, that's related to chemotherapy. It has a role here, and by binding to the receptors in the spinal cord, it can alter pain sensitivity. So these are the different areas of the brain through which these receptors act, and they produce these effects that we talked about. Okay. So what happens to these drugs? When we are using external drugs, what happens to it? So that's what's meant by pharmacokinetics. What happens to the drug in the body? So when the cannabinoids enter our body, first they are absorbed, and how much is absorbed depends on the route of administration. That basically that's what, and the amount that is used, and also the route of administration. Once it's absorbed, it's distributed in different parts of the body in fatty tissue. That's where it is distributed. So older adults tend to contain, or they tend to retain the cannabinoids for a longer period of time, because they have more of fat compared to the muscle. As we age, we have more fat tissue compared to muscles. So it gets distributed there. It's broken down mostly in the liver. So again, older adults can take longer time to get rid of it from the body, because it's slowly metabolized in the liver in older adults, and it is removed from the body via bile, stools, and urine. And this can also be slower in older adults. So it can remain in the body for a longer time for older adults. Oh, sorry, I'm not able to, I'm trying to move it. Yeah, okay. So what are the factors that affect the potency and effects of cannabis? So one is the content of THC. Higher the content of THC, more potent is that version, that cannabis specimen. Okay, more amount of THC, more potent. That's what it means. Route of administration: when it is inhaled, it acts much sooner than when it is taken by mouth. It acts much sooner. When it is used along with other substances, for example, alcohol, tobacco, then it becomes more potent. So there is that risk of more side effects emerging out of that use. Other use of other medications. So since the cannabinoids are broken down by the liver, several other medications are also broken down or metabolized in the liver. So other medications that we take, they can impact the effect of cannabis, and cannabis can impact the effect of those drugs as well. So there is an interaction. And also the duration and frequency of use. So longer a person has been using, more and more, because there's kind of a what you call tolerance to that, increased tolerance. So lesser will be the effect, and they will have to keep on increasing the dose. Okay, so this table here shows the time it takes, for the drug to act when it is administered through different routes, how much is available, and how long it takes for the drug to be used up. So when it is inhaled, it peaks within minutes. Within minutes, it starts acting and the effect starts peaking. But when it is taken by mouth, the effects peak in only about 2 to 3 hours. And similarly, the other routes also, it takes rectal and through the mucosa, the soft tissues in the mouth, and through the nose, it takes much longer. Availability: when it is inhaled, about 25% of the drug becomes available. When it is consumed orally by mouth, about 5 to 15%. And it's similarly the same with the other methods as well. Half-life tells us what amount of the drug is used up, or how long it takes for half of the drug to be used up. Okay, so when it is inhaled, in about 1 to 2 hours, half the dosage of drug is used up already, because it acts faster. Whereas when you take it by mouth, it takes 4 to 8 hours. So that means once it's taken by mouth, it can remain in the body for about 16 hours or so. That longer it remains in the body. And the other methods, it's not very clear how much is the half-life. And when it is inhaled, there are several other factors that determines how much the actual amount of drug that is entering our body. And that depends on, how long, how deep an inhalation you take, how long you can hold your breath. So there are so many things that determine the amount of drug that actually enters the body, and very variable in the case of oral consumption. When you use edibles, edibles containing cannabinoids, it's very variable. So nobody can exactly know how much amount is actually present there and is available. Looking at, moving on to the topic of whether medical cannabinoids are safe and effective in older adults, what is the evidence that we have? Now, the truth is that high quality systemic studies are lacking. We do not have many of high quality studies. One big study that I could, in my research that I could find was that a prospective study of patients who are 65 years and older. This came from a medical specialty, cannabis specialty clinic in Israel. Okay, and they got they sent a questionnaire to their clients, their patients who were using cannabis between the periods of January 2015 to October 2017, for the 2-year time. How many were using and for what purposes they were using it. About 2,000 people answered the initial questionnaire. And they said that they were all taking it for pain. So they were using several different strains, mainly for cancer-related pain. That was the main reason. And that mostly it was cancer-related and palliative kind of pain. That was the reason they were using. Majority of them reported their quality of life as bad to very bad, in the beginning. And a second questionnaire was sent to them 6 months after they have been on this cannabinoids for 6 months. But at that time, only 900 people participated in the survey. So we do not know whether the rest of them discontinued, or they passed on, or they stopped using the drug. We do not know what happened to the remaining. But of the 900 people who responded to the second survey that was done after 6 months, 93% of people said that medical cannabis was safe and effective for them. That's what they reported. They said that, there was a significant reduction in the intensity of pain because they were using it for cancer-related pain. So there was significant reduction in the pain on a scale of 0 to 10. Many of them had a pain, they were at that level of 8, 9 in the beginning. It came down to 4. So they reported significant decrease in pain and improvement in quality of life. Initially, 79% were reporting their quality of life as bad to very bad. But after 6 months of use, about 59% of people reported their quality of life as good to very good. And also there was a reduction in the use of other medications such as the opioids. But the researchers, the study investigators noted that the persons who were on cannabis, they were functioning much less efficiently than regular older adults. So their functional ability was actually much less. So when you look at this study, this is a population study that's conducted in human beings, but it's not a properly conducted study. In a usual study, there is one group of people with a particular characteristics, they are given the drug, and a similar group of people, the same characteristics, who are given a placebo, a non-drug. And then you compare the effects. But this is not a study like that. This is just an observational study. So it lacks, the evidence is not that strong. And for short duration, so 6 months, the participants in the study, they were using mixed strains. So we do not know from which strain they got the benefit because they were using mixed strains. And there were no proper conducted trials, like the clinical trials, the properly conducted studies were not there. So that makes this evidence, the quality of the evidence, weak. So it's possible that it is safe and effective, but we cannot just convincingly say that because we do not have that robust evidence. That's not available at this time. Moving on to a dementia scenario. Now, as you all know, this is a definition I want to share here. This is according to the Diagnostic Manual DSM-5 definition. Dementia is defined as sustained deterioration of cognitive abilities that is sufficiently severe to impact a person's occupational functioning and social functioning. In simple terms, it means progressive loss, progressive decline in cognitive abilities or mental abilities that impacts a person's daily life. Okay, that's what dementia refers to. And the most common forms or the causes of dementia are Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause, about 60 to 70%. And this is due to a collection of some abnormal proteins in the brain called beta amyloid and tau proteins that destroys the nerve cells in the brain. And that's what is responsible for the symptoms of dementia in Alzheimer's disease. Vascular dementia is another common type of dementia. Symptoms are mainly caused because of stroke. So it's related, dementia is related to stroke or some abrupt cutoff of blood flow to the brain. Dementia with Lewy body, this is another type of dementia, again, due to another abnormal protein called alpha-synuclein protein depositing in different parts of the brain. That affects the functioning of the normal functioning of the brain. Then there is dementia in Parkinson's disease, similar type of dementia as the Lewy body dementia. So the same protein, alpha-synuclein protein, depositing in parts of the brain that affect movement and thinking. So that's basically what's happening in Parkinson's disease dementia. And then there is frontotemporal dementia. Here it is abnormal tau protein that is affecting the normal functioning of the brain. Now, when we look at the dementia stats, according to the latest stats available, about 564,000 Canadians are currently living with a diagnosis of dementia. And this number is expected to double to 937,000 by 2031. So just in 10 years, we are expecting the numbers to actually double to 937,000 and triple by 2050. And over 75% of persons with dementia, dementia is a progressive condition, and over 75% of people with dementia experience mood and behavioral symptoms. And this can be, irritability, aggression, agitation, resisting care, inappropriate behavior, etc., sleep disturbances, and so on. And these mood and behavioral symptoms are they cause significant amount of caregiver stress and burden and lead to premature placement of the person in care, reduced quality of life, and increased cost. Okay, so now we look at the treatment. What's the treatment scenario? How does it look like in dementia? Now we know that licensed, approved medications are available only for Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease dementia. And these medications are Aricept or donepezil, Exelon or rivastigmine, Remenil or galantamine, and Ebixa, that's another drug that's also used. Now, the fact is that these drugs do not cure they do not cure the disease. They do not slow the progression, but they only help to control symptoms for a short period of time. And after that, they stop working. Okay, and then the full spectrum of all the symptoms of dementia, you would be seeing it. So there is no cure at this point of time, and they produce modest benefit. You get some improvement in the cognitive symptoms, or it might just remain stable at that level without progressing, as long as the drugs work. So that is the reality at this point of time. And there is some minimal effect on behavioral symptoms, not quite a lot, but some benefit on behavioral symptoms as well. So at this point of time, these behavioral and mood and behavioral symptoms of dementia, they are also called BPSD, behavioral and psychological symptoms. Basically, mood and behavioral symptoms. At this point of time, the first line of management is with non-drug, non-medical interventions. So that's what is first suggested. Non-medical interventions such as music, massage, art, etc., but they produce some modest benefits, variable benefits, and for some people it works. In extreme behavioral symptoms, they do not work that much. And then the medications are tried. Then the safest medications are some antidepressants that can be tried, and some antipsychotics, which are stronger, more potent, powerful medications, but they have more side effects too. So at this point of time, we really do not have great drugs to cure the symptoms of dementia, and also to manage the behavioral symptoms. We do not have adequate medication. So there is need for new, safe and more effective medications to treat the dementia, as well as to manage the behavioral symptoms. So that is the reality at this point of time. So these are the neuropsychiatric symptoms or the behavioral symptoms present in Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common type of dementia. This is similar for other dementias as well. So apathy, so on this y-axis, we have the percentage. And on x-axis, we have all the different behavioral and mood symptoms. So apathy is very common, very prominent feature. Aggression, anxiety, irritation, depression, aberrant motor behavior. So this includes wandering behavior, sleep disturbances, late day agitation, or what they call sundowning. So increasing confusion and all that from the late afternoon onwards. Disinhibited behavior, that's loss of inhibitions, and inappropriate behavior, delusions and hallucinations. And the proportion of these can vary in all the different types of dementia. So these are the non-medical approaches for behavioral symptoms in dementia. I've just created a table if someone is interested in using that, even though it's not that relevant to the topic. So social contact like pet therapy, one-on-one time, spending one-on-one time with a person, that helps. Massage, music and massage, art therapy, individualized music and individualized art therapy, it works. For people who have a tendency to be physically aggressive, outdoor activities, outdoor exercise programs, all that was shown to really benefit them. Robotic pets, some technological innovations are available, like virtual reality, robotic pets, they are also found to be beneficial. And of course, combined with caregiver interventions such as caregiver education and support, this forms part of the, sorry, I jumped lots of slides. I'm so sorry. I just accidentally pressed something and it just jumped several slides. Okay, this is where we are. My apologies. Okay, so this is the medical management of behavior changes. So indication is only when all the non-medical interventions have failed. Okay, so first line of management is the non-medical interventions that we talked about. So when they have failed and there's a significant risk of someone getting hurt, that is the indication for using medications to control behaviors. And always before a medication is prescribed, an evaluation of the existing medications is important to make sure that none of the existing medications is contributing to these behaviors. So there's a medication review followed by introduction of a new medication to manage those behavioral symptoms. And the usual first line of management is the usual medications given for Alzheimer's disease, which is the acetylcholine esterase inhibitors, such as Aricept. They are the ones that are tried first, and they do have a role in managing mood, anger, aggression, restlessness, some of these behavioral symptoms to some extent. So even when this medication does not control, does not improve cognition, the mental abilities, they still play a role in controlling these behavioral symptoms to some extent, especially in early dementia. And then when they don't work, antidepressants such as citalopram and escitalopram, they also have been found to be beneficial, and they are safer drugs to begin with. And if they don't work, then we move on to antipsychotics. And these medications are heavily sedating. Not only that, they have got very serious adverse events. They can cause stroke, sudden heart attack, death, and so on. So they're not very safe medications for use. So can we consider medical cannabinoids? Do they have a role in treating dementia? That is a question that we try to look at to find evidence. So we know that cannabis plant has been used for centuries to relieve some symptoms in older adults like pain, depression, sleep disturbances, and loss of appetite. And this broad, this been used for several of these situations because of the bioactive components, the cannabinoids that is present in cannabis. And in the recent past, over the recent few years, there's been growing interest in cannabinoids, because many older adults, they might have used it when they were younger, and they're familiar with it, and they are more comfortable using it when they are older, because they have some experience using it in the past. And also many people think that it is natural, so it must be safer than the drugs, No, and that's partly a misconception, because these are also bioactive components and they can have side effects as well. So there's some kind of a positive attitude. People are okay to use that. And that's based on 2 surveys that were done in 2016 and 2017. It was found that older adults are quite okay to use this versus any other new drug that is introduced. So how do they act? Do these medical cannabinoids really work in dementia? Is there any role? And what we found was that in certain studies conducted in the lab and in animal models, these cannabinoids did cause some benefit. They did produce some benefit. So by attaching to the CB1 receptors that we talked about, they had a role. They were releasing some chemical substances, some useful chemical substances in the brain, which helped improve cognition and memory, and also helped to reduce pain and behavioral symptoms. Okay. And by checking or controlling the production of harmful chemical substances in the brain, like the glutamate, they also reduce the formation of these abnormal proteins in the brain, like the amyloid and the tau, amyloid plaques and the tau tangles that cause Alzheimer's disease. And also by promoting energy balance, by maintaining that balance of energy in the nerve cells in the brain, it improved the survival of neurons. So nerve cells were staying alive longer, healthier longer than otherwise. So those effects were observed through CB1 receptors. And by attaching to CB2 receptors, they found that these cannabinoids were reducing inflammation in the brain, which is a driving factor for damage, the death and damage of nerve cells. So they were reducing inflammation in the brain. So there was a neuroprotective effect. They were also increasing enhancing the survival of nerve cells in the brain. So it's slowing down neurodegeneration. So when you have this first glance at these effects, then these effects are very promising, because they can have a very beneficial effect in managing dementia. But the flip side is that these studies were conducted in animal models and in cell cultures in the labs. These tests were not conducted in human beings. So there is no population studies conducted. And based on all the research that we have been seeing in the past few years, we know that there are several medications that do very well in the lab. In labs, in the stage of lab studies and animal studies, they do wonders, but they fail to deliver when the same drug is given to human beings. Because we are not the same as animals. There is a lot of difference in the way we can control dementia in animals. Scientists have cured dementia in animals long ago, but you see, we are still struggling to find a cure for Alzheimer's in human beings. So there is a difference in that. So we cannot really say that we have convincing evidence. So at this point of time, again, we do not have robust evidence to advocate or to prescribe these cannabinoids for treating dementia. So how about managing behavioral symptoms? Now here, several human studies have been done, which is great. And in some studies these were small studies, done for short periods of time. Synthetic THC, some studies that used synthetic THC, they saw that synthetic THC was able to cause significant improvement in behavioral symptoms in late onset Alzheimer's disease. So that is Alzheimer's disease seen in adults over the age of 65, older age. So there was significant improvement in some behavioral symptoms. It was causing decrease in pain and decrease in anxiety. Those effects were seen. And because of that, there was persistent reduction in nighttime agitation and sleep disturbances. So there was more, people were sleeping some more soundly. There was improvement in sleep duration and improvement also in food consumption. So let's look at the research evidence here. So there are 27 articles have been published on that topic, and studies that are relevant are 2, and one is a systematic review of 12 studies. So 12 small studies conducted involving fewer people, about 10 to 12 people, for about studies range in duration from 2 weeks to a maximum of 12 weeks. So short periods of study. And these studies included, there's the systematic review. In total, about 178 patients were there in all the 12 studies together. It included 6 small randomized control trials. These were properly conducted trials, but they were very small. Two other trials and 4 case studies. So together about 12 studies were there. And of these studies, 4 studies showed benefit. And according to 4 studies, there was benefit in using cannabinoids for controlling the behavioral symptoms in dementia. But for the other remaining 8 studies, it was very inconclusive. Okay. And there was the other study was the uncontrolled study. That is, there is no control group there. Before and after study. So just observational study, before and after study in 10 patients. They found that they used cannabis oil with THC and CBD. So mixed THC and CBD containing cannabis oil. And there was some improvement in some specific symptoms in 4 women. Out of these 10 participants, in the 4 women, there were some benefits. So again, when you look at these studies here, of course, they are population studies, so conducted in human beings. So that's a good thing. But they have they are small studies, few studies, small size, short duration. And because of that, again, the quality of evidence is weak. It's possible that these drugs, there is a potential, there is some potential that the cannabinoids could be effective in managing behavioral symptoms, but we do not have a robust evidence. So physicians are kind of reluctant at this point of time to recommend or prescribe that to their patients because we do not have strong evidence. It's a science and we go with the science that's available, and the science here is lacking. Of course, we hope that with more research that hopefully more research will be conducted, and based on that we might, more information might be available. But at this point of time, we do not have enough evidence. So that is that's a fact at this point of time. So looking at the role of medical cannabinoids in managing other conditions. So what we do see here is that chronic pain, cannabinoids have been found to benefit 38% of people, control their chronic pain for up to 30% or more after using for 4 weeks compared to people on placebo. So there is this is 38% people on cannabinoids versus 30% on placebo. So it's not much difference. There is some difference. The same with palliative pain as well. So the evidence again here is not very strong, but still it is being used, after a trial. So the recommendation here is for cancer-related pain, first give a trial of standard medications. And if the person is not responding to those standard medications and the pain remains severe, then it combine a cannabinoid can be given in combination. But one thing that was observed was that people who used cannabis had more of adverse effects. So that was something to bear in mind. Chemotherapy induced nausea and vomiting, controlling in 1 day. Here, cannabinoids had more evidence because 47% of people had benefit compared to 13% on placebo. So this was a more stronger evidence. But again, there are several anti-nausea and anti-vomiting medications available which have fewer side effects. Okay. For spasticity, again, there was some benefit of cannabinoids had some effect. 35% of people benefited compared to 25% people on placebo. So some benefit here as well. But the recommendation was that based on these studies, the recommendation was that first try the standard existing medications for all the pain, the nausea, and the spasticity. And if the person is not responding, then add a cannabinoid, preferably a synthetic cannabinoid rather than a natural, marijuana. When we'll talk about that, why that was that recommendation, from where it came from. So these are the adverse events. The common adverse events seen in with use of cannabinoids. It was found that risk of adverse events was more with cannabinoids compared to placebo, naturally, because placebo they are not drugs, they are something that doesn't act much. Then the withdrawal due to adverse events was also higher for cannabinoids versus placebo. So 11% people who were using cannabinoids withdrew compared to just 3% who were on placebo. And these are the common adverse events, most commonly reported. And the ones that are more important, I have bolded here. Can see that feeling high. 1 in 3 persons on cannabinoids experience that feeling of high. Sedation experienced by 1 in 2 people who are using cannabinoids. 1 in 2 experience that sedation. Difficulty speaking is experienced by 32% of people. That is 1 in 3 again. 1 in 3% of people have difficulty with communication. Dizziness, again, 1 in 3 people experience dizziness after using cannabinoids. Hypotension, that is sudden drop in blood pressure. And that's a risk for older adults, risk for falls. So along with dizziness and hypotension, this decrease in blood pressure, 1 in 4 users, cannabinoid users experience that. So together, this constitute a huge risk for falls. And these are some of the adverse events. Also, since cannabinoids are processed in the liver, and several other drugs, older adults tend to be taking several other medications as well. And those medications are also broken down in the liver. There's a risk for drug interactions. So when cannabinoids are used, their effect, we are looking at what is the effect on other drugs. So if if opioids are also used at the same time, cannabinoids can increase the effect of opioids. Because of that, because they increase the effect and reduce the side effects, what can happen is there is a risk of overdose. There can be a risk of overdose. So always when cannabinoids are used, opioids have to be decreased naturally. These are anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen, NSAIDs. These are anti-inflammatory drugs. Example like ibuprofen, Advil, Motrin, etc. When they are used along with cannabinoids, cannabinoids decrease the metabolism of these drugs and increase their side effects. Okay, so again, it doesn't actually benefit by using that these drugs will not benefit. So you'll have to decrease the dose of those drugs. Insulin, many older adults take insulin. Now, cannabis, THC can decrease insulin sensitivity. So the person's blood sugar will remain high. So more of insulin will have to be given. Whereas if CBD is used, it increases insulin sensitivity. So there is a risk of sudden drop in blood sugar when cannabinoids, CBD is used along with insulin. Statins are medications used to control or regulate our cholesterol levels. So some statins like simvastatin and lovastatin, the cannabinoids can increase their breakdown. So that means you'll have to use more of that drug. But for the other drug, for others like Pravachol, those type of statins, there is no effect. Many older adults are on antiplatelet drugs, anticoagulants. That's people who have high blood pressure, diabetes, they tend to be on anticoagulants. And cannabinoids can increase their effects. So we need to go with a lower dose of these anticoagulants. Then cannabinoids can affect each other. So if a combination of cannabinoids are used, some effects will be increased, some effects will be decreased. So it can, for some cannabinoids, the effects will be increased, for others it will be decreased. So there's a lot of interaction with other drugs. So this is something that we have to keep in mind, especially when we think of using cannabinoids in older adults. So then the question remains, over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of promotion in the media about CBD being a wonder drug. So we wanted to really look into that. What is the evidence that is available? So as we know, CBD has no psychoactive effect, but it has got some anti-anxiety effects, some beneficial effects there. And THC is the psychoactive component. Now, when I looked at all the studies that are available, there is no study conducted that compares THC against CBD. No study conducted so far. Okay, so that was not very helpful. But there is some studies that were conducted that looked at whether THC is better than giving a combination of THC or CBD, or whether CBD is better than giving a combination of THC CBD. So that was the studies that were available. 4 studies were available to compare the benefits and harms of CBD alone versus THC CBD, or THC alone versus THC CBD. 2 studies said CBD alone was better, whereas the other 2 studies said that the combination was better. So again, that was inconclusive. Okay, and the truth is that when you look at the natural products, the marijuana, it has a combination of THC and CBD. It's a tall combination in various levels of combination. The same with the synthetic ones as well. So at this point, we cannot really say convincingly, we don't have convincing evidence to say that CBD is superior or better than giving THC CBD. Whether giving CBD alone is beneficial, we do not have robust evidence at this point of time. But things can change when more studies are conducted. Now, comparing medical marijuana and synthetic cannabinoids. So the recommendation to doctors was to use synthetic cannabinoids and to refrain from prescribing medical marijuana. So there was I wanted to find out what is the reason behind that. And this is the information that's available. Now, many older adults who have used cannabinoids before, medical marijuana before, or marijuana before, when they were young, they are more comfortable using the natural plant rather than using synthetic. And many people I've heard say that they don't get the same benefit from synthetic. I do not know whether it is just a matter of what is in your mind, because what the research is showing is that in the case of medical marijuana, studies are showing significant bias. They are exaggerating the benefits and underplaying the harms, because as I said earlier, the marijuana plant, it has got about 500 chemical substances. All of them have that, including the THC CBD. So along with the THC or CBD, you are smoking or inhaling a lot of other chemical substances that might be harmful. Whereas in the synthetic cannabinoids, they contain only the cannabinoid. They don't contain the other things like terpenes and all other things they don't have. So there's less bias in their studies. Medical marijuana, the natural plant, different products have different compositions. We cannot say what is exactly how much of THC, how much of CBD, how much of other components are there, because they have all different compositions. Whereas synthetic ones are more clear. What is in there, the contents are very clear. Clear formulations are available. Again, amount of drug that enters the body, we cannot control that, because volume per use varies with the mode of delivery. If somebody is using, say, 3 buds, how big are the buds? How small are the buds? It all depends on how much is there. It's very variable. So dosing can be very challenging with the natural, with medical marijuana. But when we compare that with synthetic cannabinoids, these come as inhalants, they come as sprays, they come as tablets or capsules. So dosing is more consistent. Long-term side effects are unknown for medical marijuana. Nobody has conducted those studies, whereas side effects are more known and trackable for synthetic cannabinoids. So this is the reason why doctors are more comfortable prescribing synthetic cannabinoids versus the medical marijuana. Now, are medical cannabinoids, are they suitable for everyone? No, they are not. So for people who have a history of psychosis, it is not safe, because 17% of users of cannabinoids experience symptoms of psychosis, hallucinations, delusions, etc. So it's not suitable for people who have a history of psychosis. Not safe for people who have a history of bipolar disorder or a family history of any of these mental illnesses. History of cannabis allergies. If anybody has had an allergic episode, then it's not safe for them. People who have pre-existing heart conditions like unstable angina or pre-existing heart disease, it's not suitable for them, because it can cause that decrease in blood pressure, hypotension. So there's a risk of heart attacks and risk of interaction with other drugs, because that are metabolized in the liver. There is that risk as well. So more medications a person is taking, the more risk of interaction with other drugs cannabis will have with other drugs. So the current evidence in elderly population is scarce. So we do not have enough evidence to say this. What other side effects are there, we do not know. what other contraindications. So this is what is available according to research at this time. So extensive research is actually required. Now, these are the cannabinoids that are available. These are synthetically produced. Dronabinol, and this is a synthetic THC. And this is indication is for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, and also weight loss related to cancer and AIDS. Nabilon Sismet, this is a THC derivative, and this is indicated for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. THC and CBD combination is called Sativex, and this is indicated for neuropathic pain in multiple sclerosis and also spinal cord injury. And THC, pure THC, and this is recreation product, so it is there is no indication at this point of time for medical purposes. And these are the drugs, the things that you can buy with a cost. I've just for anyone who is interested, I've just included this slide. Now, this slide is talking about the algorithm or the procedure that your doctors will follow if you express an interest in using a cannabinoid. Okay, so this is the algorithm, that procedure that they've been given to follow. So if they are considering medical cannabinoids, for what situations is it recommended at this point of time? For neuropathic pain, palliative pain, that's cancer-related pain, spasticity in multiple sclerosis and spinal cord injury, and chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. These are the conditions where it is approved for use at this point of time. And again, if you are using it for any of these conditions, then at least you have to try initially give a trial of 2 to 3 medications. So for pain, at least 2 or 3 standard pain medications have to be tried. And if they don't work, you then proceed to think about administering a cannabinoid. For palliative pain, also the same way. And for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting and spasticity, again, standard therapies are tried, standard medications, and if they don't work, if the person is not responding, then we think about adding a cannabinoid. And then once a physician is deciding, okay, this is a condition for which they are using, we'll usually use it along with standard therapy. So as an adjunct, as an additional drug. So for neuropathic or palliative pain, the Nabilon, this is a tablet, that's a capsule that's used, oral, and Nabiximol is a spray. So Nabilon or Nabiximol, it's a THC derivative, that's what is commonly used. Chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, Nabilon, the tablet, the oral medication is preferred. Spasticity in multiple sclerosis or spinal cord injury, it is Nabilon or Nabiximol. And while this prescribing information is given, this is given in established in 2018 and still continued to date. There is also strong recommendation against prescribing medical marijuana as the first line of management, because as I mentioned earlier, we do not know the long-term effects, we do not know. And again, there is a lot of bias in the studies already conducted. So where the benefits are, we do not really know what other components are also entering the body, and maybe that can cause cancer or do something else. So there are some unknown things and things that have not been studied also entering our body. So this is just some giving you some information about the clinical trials that are ongoing, and some of these are for dementia as well. So dementia-related studies. Namisol, this is pure natural THC, phase 1. So initial study, this is being tried for patients with dementia, and to find whether it is safe and to find what doses work. So it's a very initial phase 1 level study. It's ongoing. Dronabinol, this is also from THC, a drug derived from THC. It's in phase 2. So phase 1 is the early study. If you think about clinical trials, they are conducted in different stages. There is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Okay, phase 1 trial, it's just conducted in a small, in healthy volunteers, and just giving the drug to see what are the side effects. It is safe in human beings, that kind of study. Phase 2 is more in people with the symptoms of the disease. and also healthy volunteers. And again, here the main focus is on it's in hundreds. It involves about hundreds of people. The phase 1 is very small, few people, whereas this one is hundreds of people, and conducted for about 2 years, and just look at the side effects and look at what dosage works. Okay, and phase 3, many drugs clear phase 1 and phase 2, but phase 3 is the real testing stage, where they are using that drug in people with the disease only, no healthy volunteers, and they're studying the effects, the side effects, the benefits, and all that. And this phase 3 trial can go on up to 4 years. And a drug that clears the phase 3 will finally, if it clears, if it delivers its expected results, then it will be approved and made available for the for commercial use. So that is how drug trials go. So phase 1 is very initial early study. Phase 2 study is dronabinol. Then Nebulon, again, this is the Sunnybrook. So there's one study, I forgot to mention that when I talked about the clinical studies. This was the latest study that was conducted. This was conducted by Dr. Christine Langtot and her group of researchers through Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center in Toronto. And it was partly funded by the Alzheimer's Society of Canada. And the drug they used, this was a dementia study, and they used Nabilon, which is a derivative of THC. They used Nabilon 1 to 2 milligram in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease, and very severe agitation. Okay, those were the patients included in that study. And there were about 33 participants in the study, and the drug was used and the trial was about for 14 weeks. And they found that Nebulon was very effective in reducing nighttime agitation. And the persons were sleeping better, eating well, but it came at the cost of very heavy sedation. And that was a conclusion. It does show potential, but they were not able to come up with the right dose, the safe dose, the optimum dose that will reduce agitation at the same time that will not cause much sedation. They couldn't arrive at that dose. So they are now planning at the phase 3 study, to continue with that. So that study is planned sometime in this year. I do not know where it is not. They have not started recruiting yet, but they're planning this study. Then there is two other studies planned. One is the THC-free CBD oil. So just CBD oil. And this is a phase 2 study. And they are planning the study. Recruitment has not started. Cannabis versus placebo oil. This is a study that has started recruiting. And it's cannabis on dementia-related agitation and aggression. So they're studying the use of that. And it's in phase 2 study. Okay, so these are the available studies. When you think about, now I'm concluding now. So one thing I want to say before moving on to the concluding messages is that, we know that several families are using cannabinoids with their person with dementia. And some are using it without even discussing with the physician. Many physicians are open to that because there is some evidence, but not strong enough, right? There is some anecdotal evidence. So whatever evidence is available, it's more of anecdotal evidence. And we hear from some caregivers too that they are using. So we always tell, please inform your physician. Just let them know that you are giving this medication, because if at all there is any side effects, if your physician knows that you are using it, then they can track it down to that product, to whatever you are using. And they can tease it apart, which drug is causing that side effect, and they'll be able to manage that. So if at all you're planning, talk to your physician and understand very clearly about the benefits of you taking it and the risks. So very clear, have that conversation. Let them know that if you're using it, let them know so that they can help you manage any complications or side effects. Because we think that this could be useful, there is a potential benefit, but we do not have strong evidence. And medical sciences, it's based on scientific evidence, research evidence. It's a science. So if we do not have robust evidence, we cannot use it for public health measures. We cannot use it. Nobody can promote that. So that's the concluding thing I want to say. So looking at these concluding messages, again, the bringing back, the final points. So when we talk about medical cannabinoids, it includes medical marijuana, the plant products, as well as the manufactured ones. We know that cannabinoids may help people with chronic pain, muscle spasticity, and chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. Evidence is not that strong. It could be that not enough studies have been conducted so far because the drug was kind of illegal, right? So, and maybe that much of money was not invested. But especially now with dementia becoming a looming concern, public health concern, internet for all over the world, we hope that more studies will be conducted. Okay, cannabinoids could potentially benefit people with Alzheimer's disease, and also in managing those behavioral symptoms. But limited studies have been conducted at this point of time. So robust evidence is lacking at this time. Nabilon seems promising, as I mentioned earlier, Nabilon, but significant concerns around sedation exist at this point of time. Now, with older adults, some things to keep in mind is one thing is that long-term harms are unknown. Then clearance of cannabis from the body is slowed down because of decreased liver function, kidney function, and the drug can remain longer in the body. So there is all those risk effects. Then there is that risk of hypotension and dizziness. That is also something to be considered. There are also some impact on memories there, but dementia, anyway, there is that memory loss is already there. Well-conducted, high-quality studies are required before cannabinoids can be safely prescribed for older adults. So discuss with your physician about potential benefits, risks, known harms, and weigh those before taking cannabinoids. And if considering cannabinoids, synthetic cannabinoids are preferred to medical marijuana. So they, so you have to have it's a mindset. It's basically the mindset that makes people, we have heard people say that it's not as effective, but it's the same drug, and it's given in a cleaner form. That's the only thing. It's the same drug given in a cleaner form. So having that synthetic cannabinoids is much better because you can track down, you can control the side effects much better. Those can be clearly controlled. So that is, that's about the presentation. Now, these are some of our current programs and services. Since COVID last year, we have transferred all our programs online. So we offer day programs. Our day program is online. Our social workers provide one-on-one support. They continue to provide one-on-one support through email, phone calls, or videos. Again, you can have extended hours by appointment. Instant chat with a social worker is also available. So any question that you may have, anything related to dementia, or you want to know about what programs and services are available, or you want to know about how to access those services, how to navigate the system, so any concern at all related to dementia, you can call our social workers. It's a absolutely free service. So please do utilize it. We provide online weekly education. If you go onto our website, every week there is we offer 1 or 2 educational sessions over Zoom, yeah, they're free. You can just register and you can attend. You can get information about community resources and even referral to community resources. Our website, it gives you lots of videos, lots of articles and information. And Facebook chats we do every month. Last year we did every 2 weeks, twice a month. We had Facebook chats with physicians on different topics related to dementia, but this year we have gone to once monthly. And if you have any questions, always please call. Please feel free to call our office, 403-290-0110. And these are all my references if you want to get more information. And big thank you to our funders, United Way, Gordie Howe Cares, and Alberta Retired Teachers Charitable Foundation. And that is all from me. And I'm just going to take a moment here to post the evaluation link in the chat box, and then I will address your questions. So thank you for listening.
While you're posting that, I just want to say thank you, Padma. That was my brain. I'm going to be laying in bed tonight trying to process all of that information. It was absolutely phenomenal, as always. And I know there are a few questions that are down in the chat, so I don't know if you can access them. I can always read them.
Yeah, I can see. I can
Okay.
see the chat box. Let me see here.
And
Okay.
There was one question that was sent to me directly. So if that individual is comfortable asking the question, then I will encourage that individual to ask. And if they want me to ask it, then they can just let me know. Okay, you go ahead.
Okay, so one question is, why do we think the numbers are going to triple by 2050? That's a great question. So that's because the population is aging, and the risk of developing dementia increases as we age. Okay, and we are aging and we are living longer, because of the advancement in medical science, and the medical technology. We are living longer with all chronic conditions. So, if you look at the population, the segment of population that is expanding, that is 85 and above, that population, that segment is becoming more and more people in that age group is living now. And because of the good medical service or the health promotion efforts that are going on, and at that age there's 1 in 3 persons can be diagnosed with dementia. So this is the reason why we are expecting it to double, because all over the world population is aging and people living longer in that higher age group where they have a more risk of developing dementia. So I hope that answers your question. Did you mention about low dose THC with Alzheimer's to reduce amyloid plaques characteristic of the disease? So the medications that were used in those studies, they were actually in animal studies. I do not know whether you noticed that, animal studies and cell cultures. So they were not conducted in human beings, in that to study that effect on Alzheimer's disease. So we do not have any evidence at this point of time in human beings. No evidence is available at all to say whether it decreases the plaques. But in animal models, of course, it was reducing amyloid plaques and also the tangles, in animal models and in cell studies, but not in human beings. Okay, I hope that answered your question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do not see any more questions. Does anyone have any other questions?
I had one question that came through to me privately, and it was about, I'm just trying to find it, Trepanase, I think. Where is it? Where is it? Sorry. It was something about Trepanase and how it would affect THC. Probably like with Parkinson's. Shoot. I think, wait, let me just see. I think control command. I think I found it. I'm just going to post it.
Yeah, if you can send it to me, that question, Jess.
I will. There it is. Okay, there it is.
Okay, terpenes. Yeah, we'll be discussing how terpenes play a role. Yeah, so terpenes are the other components that are present in the in cannabis. And, it's not very clear about the role in Alzheimer's disease or managing symptoms. But one thing is clear that they add to the smoke content, so that's the effect. That's not considered as a positive effect. It is considered as a negative effect at this point of time. But again, I should say that not any in-depth studies have not been conducted to find out how exactly the terpenes, what role they play. That kind of an exclusive study on terpenes have not been conducted. As you know, all studies, especially last year, no cannabis studies have taken place last year. Everything was for COVID. All dementia-related studies were pushed to the back burner because COVID was front stage, center and front stage. But so no information is available at this time. I do not have any information to comment authoritatively about that. I'm assuming if one decides to use some CBD with dementia clients to start low. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, start low and go slow. Absolutely. And also inform the physician. Okay. Always it's better to inform the physician so they know how to track it. Otherwise, they are kind of, they may not know. If you do not inform them, regardless of whether they approve, some physicians are okay, they would approve, some physicians are not. Regardless of that, if you're using, do inform them, because that's the only way they can track down any complications or side effects that you may encounter. Okay. Any other question, anyone?
One more just came in.
Have other minor cannabinoids ever been tested alongside? No, not at this point of time. Not much is available at this point of time. Okay. Yeah. So I have tried to share the most current and the most accurate information that's available. When I prepared this presentation, initially was developed, I think 2 years ago, or yeah, when 2018, when cannabis was legalized in Canada. There were lots of questions. Our caregivers had lots of questions about cannabis. So I developed this. But since then, based on research that is evolving, I have updated the presentation to include the most accurate and the most recently available information. So we keep updating it so that we can inform our caregivers in the best way possible. Okay. I do not see any other questions.
No.
So I hope this presentation was beneficial for you, because I have put in some effort to update it and bring the most accurate information for you and most helpful. So this has been the honest, because I'm not funded by any company. So I'm not promoting anything. I'm just sharing what is there. Okay, what evidence we have at this point of time. We might have more evidence as more research gets done. Okay, as you know, the raw plant contains non-psychoactive THC. Using as a juice to eating it raw should be okay. Yeah, that's where that's what we talked about in the form of edibles. We do not know exactly how much amount is getting into the body, how much is staying. So that's not very clear there though. Okay. So there is some gray areas where nobody can say how it's going to affect you. Nobody can be sure. So, if everybody has the right to try it or not to try, it is your own discretion. Even doctors will not say you should not use it. They will say that this is the evidence available. It's up to you. So you choose, and if you always, as I said, try to use it in a safe way if you are using. And if at all it's not helping, it will be beneficial to stop it at that point of time. Are there different strengths of the oils? Yes. Yeah, different strengths of oils are available. Yes. And CBD oil alone and CBD THC mixed oil also available, and different strengths. And there'll be very clear formulations. It will be given for you. Exactly, it will be labeled. The labeling, they're supposed to label exactly with the clear amounts so that there is no confusion at all. I do not see any other question. If even after today there is if anyone has any question, please feel free to send your questions to Jess, and Jessica can send them to me and I will respond to your question. Okay. I've not included my email, but even if you send it to email info@alzheimercalgary.ca, the email that you see in the slide, and just say this question is for Padma. My name is Padma. Let's not forget that. Okay, Padma. Yeah, so that's my name. And just say that it's for Padma, or the one who presented on cannabis. And I'm the only one who presents on cannabis in my team. So there won't be any confusion. And I can respond to your question. Okay.
As always, Padma, thank you for taking the time to present for us and giving us all this information. My brain is just going to be going.
I know that there's lots of information. Yeah.
I love it. And so tomorrow I will be sending an email. Hopefully we'll include this video link and of course the slides and the Survey Monkey, so that we can always make sure that Padma is doing the best job that she possibly can, which I have to say is pretty darn good. So thank you.
Thank you very
Again,
much.
Padma, thank you to each and every one of you for making time this evening. And hopefully we'll see you at the next virtual speaker series. I can't remember what's coming up next, but it might be something that I'm going to be doing.
So please do, respond to that evaluation survey. I have posted this in the chat box as well. So if you just click that before you leave, you can open up that window and you can right away do that evaluation. You don't even have to wait until tomorrow. I'll be sending Jessica the slides, the PDF copy of the slides and the evaluation link separately to her today itself. So, whenever she's sending the recording, you will have it. And just send me the recording as well, okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you again for your time, everyone. I'll stick around for a couple of moments in case people have questions for me. Padma,
Okay.
you go enjoy the rest of your evening and everyone else.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for listening. It's been great presenting to you. Okay. I'm always ready. Just whenever you need me to talk about anything related to dementia, just give me a shout.
Absolutely.
Yeah? Absolutely. Okay. So take care, everyone. Stay healthy and safe. And bye.
Thank you. Bye, Padma.
Bye.